The old chrome bell above Rosie's diner hadn't stopped ringing in 40 years, but on this particular Tuesday morning, it would chime for something extraordinary. Something that would change one woman's life forever and remind an entire town that kindness, real kindness, still moves mountains in this world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her name was Sarah Chen, 28 years old, mother of two, and she had been working double shifts at that roadside diner for 3 years straight. Every morning at 5 a.m., every night until closing. Tips that barely cover groceries. A car held together by prayers and duct tape. And a smile she wore like armor against a world that hadn't been kind to her in a very long time. What happened that Tuesday would spread across 3 states, make grown bikers cry, and prove that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. This is a story about a broke waitress, an $87 tab, and 600 motorcycles that thundered into a small town carrying something more precious than chrome and steel. They carried hope. If you believe that good deeds come back to us, that ordinary people can become heroes, and that sometimes the angels we need most ride motorcycles, then pause right here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Because this story will restore your faith in humanity. Sarah's story began 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago when her husband Michael died in a construction accident. She could count every day because grief has its own calendar, marking time not in weeks or months, but in moments when the pain hits fresh and raw. Michael had been 29, a crane operator with calloused hands and a laugh that could fill a room. He left behind Sarah, 7-year-old Emma, who had his eyes, and 4-year-old Jake, who still asked when Daddy was coming home. The insurance barely covered the funeral. The savings account that was supposed to buy them their first house emptied in 2 months. And suddenly, a woman who had spent her days making finger paintings and packing lunchboxes found herself learning words like foreclosure and eviction notice. Rosie's Diner sat on Old Highway 9, 40 miles outside of Cedar Falls. The kind of place where truckers stopped for pie and coffee, where locals gathered to complain about the weather, and where time seemed to move a little slower than the rest of the world. The building itself was a relic from the 1950s, all red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floors, with a jukebox that only played songs from before Sarah was born. Old Rosie Patterson had owned the place for 38 years. She was 72, tough as truck stop coffee, and had a heart bigger than Texas beneath her. Gruff exterior. When Sarah walked in 3 years ago, desperate and willing to work for anything, Rosie took one look at those tired eyes and hired her on the spot. The pay was minimum wage, but the tips were decent enough, and most importantly, Rosie let Sarah bring the kids after school, when she couldn't afford a babysitter. Sarah had learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. She shopped at thrift stores where Emma's school clothes came from the children's section marked gently used. She clipped coupons like her life depended on it, organizing them in a little accordion folder that went everywhere with her. She learned which grocery stores marked down meat on Tuesday mornings and which gas stations had the cheapest prices on Thursday nights. Sometimes she went without lunch so Emma and Jake could have seconds at dinner. Sometimes she wore her one good pair of shoes until the soles wore thin, then reinforced them with cardboard and duct tape. But she never complained, not once, because to her, providing for her children wasn't a burden, it was the most important job in the world. Emma was smart, scary smart. The kind of kid who read books meant for children twice her age and asked questions that made adults stop and think. But she was also old enough to notice when mommy counted coins before buying milk, old enough to understand why they moved from their house to a 2-bedroom apartment above the hardware store, old enough to feel the weight of responsibility no 7-year-old should carry. Jake was still young enough to find magic in small things. A cardboard box became a spaceship, a puddle became an ocean, and Mommy's work uniform became a superhero costume because, in his eyes, Sarah could do anything. He didn't understand why they ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner sometimes, but he never complained because Mommy always cut them into fun shapes and told stories while they ate. That Tuesday started like every other day for the past 3 years. Sarah's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., though she was usually already awake, staring at the ceiling and mentally calculating bills. Coffee brewing at 5 a.m., bacon sizzling on the grill by 5:15, and Sarah moving between tables with practiced grace by 5:30, refilling cups and taking orders with that genuine smile that made even the grumpiest customers soften around the edges. The morning regulars knew her story. There was Frank, the trucker who always ordered black coffee and wheat toast, who had lost his own wife 5 years back and understood the particular loneliness of eating dinner for one. There was Martha, the retired school teacher who came in every Tuesday for oatmeal and orange juice, who sometimes slipped Emma books she said she didn't need anymore. And there was Deputy Rodriguez, who worked the night shift and stopped by before heading home, who always left a $10 tip on a $4 breakfast and pretended not to notice when Sarah's eyes got misty with gratitude. Around noon, when the lunch rush was just beginning and Sarah was wiping down tables while mentally preparing for the afternoon crowd, the bell above the door chimed. In walked a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway, not just with his size but with his presence. His name was Thomas Bull Morrison, president of the Desert Wolves Motorcycle Club, and he looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a biker, 6'3", weathered face marked by years of sun and road dust. Wearing a black leather vest covered in patches that told stories of brotherhood, charity rides, and a life lived on two wheels. But Bull wasn't just any biker. He was a retired Marine who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and somehow managed to hold on to the best of it. After coming home, when the nightmares were too loud and the civilian world felt too quiet, he found his brotherhood on the road. The Desert Wolves weren't outlaws, they were veterans, mechanics, teachers, and fathers who happened to love the freedom of the highway and the bond that comes from riding together through whatever weather life throws at you. Bull had been riding for 14 hours straight, coming back from his father's funeral in Oklahoma. His dad had been a mean drunk who never understood why his son chose the military over working in the family auto shop, never understood why Bull chose leather and chrome over a suit and tie. But he was still Bull's father, and even complicated grief deserves its due. The diner was exactly what Bull needed: quiet, simple, honest. He slid into a corner booth, removed his leather gloves with hands that showed the wear of holding handlebars through 1,000 miles of highway, and looked around at the kind of place that reminded him why he loved small-town America. Sarah approached with her usual grace, coffee pot in hand, and that smile that had become as much a part of her uniform as the stained apron around her waist. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that made Bull's shoulders relax for the first time in days. "Coffee to start?" "Yes, ma'am," Bull replied, his voice gravelly from hours of road wind. "And I'll need a few minutes with that menu." As Sarah poured his coffee, Bull noticed things. He noticed the way she moved efficiently but never hurried, the way she checked on other customers without making them feel rushed, the way she genuinely listened when old Frank started telling the same story about his truck breaking down in Montana for the 100th time. But mostly, he noticed her shoes. They were black, practical work shoes that had been resoled at least twice and were held together in places with what looked like super glue. They were the shoes of someone who stood on her feet for 12 hours a day and couldn't afford to replace them. They told a story of hard work and harder choices, of dignity maintained in the face of struggle. When Sarah returned to take his order, Bull was ready. "I'll have the meatloaf special, extra mashed potatoes, green beans, and a slice of that apple pie. And I'll take a chocolate milk instead of the coffee." Sarah smiled, writing quickly, "Good choice. Rosie makes the best meatloaf this side of the Mississippi. And the apple pie is fresh from this morning." As she turned to go, Bull called after her softly, "Miss, what's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, turning back with a slight tilt of her head. "Sarah, I'm Bull, and I want you to know this place feels like home. Thank you for that." Something in his tone made Sarah pause. She had served thousands of customers over the past 3 years, but something about this man was different. There was kindness in his eyes, The kind that comes from someone who has seen real hardship and chooses compassion anyway. You're very welcome, Bull. I'll get that order right out to you. Bull's meal arrived 15 minutes later, and it was everything Sarah had promised. The meatloaf was thick and hearty. The mashed potatoes were creamy with just the right amount of butter, and the green beans still had that perfect snap that meant they were fresh, not frozen. But more than the food, Bull noticed Sarah. She moved through the diner like a dancer who had memorized every step. She knew that Frank liked his coffee refilled every 10 minutes exactly. She knew that Martha preferred her water glass filled to the brim, because arthritis made it hard to ask for refills. She knew that the couple in booth 3 were on their first date because they kept looking at their phones and avoiding eye contact, so she gave them extra space while still being attentive. But Bull also noticed what others might miss. He saw Sarah slip a dinner roll into her apron pocket when she thought no one was looking. He saw her decline Martha's offer of a shared piece of pie with a smile that didn't quite hide the hunger in her eyes. He saw her count her tips, quickly between tables, her lips moving silently as she calculated numbers that would determine whether she could afford gas for the rest of the week. When Bull finished his meal, Sarah brought the check, $87. It was more than he usually spent on food, but he had ordered enough for 2 people and the portions had been generous. He reached for his wallet, then stopped. Sarah was at the register, talking quietly with Rosie about something that was clearly stressing her out. "I can cover it until Friday," Sarah was saying, her voice low but audible to Bull's trained ears. "When I get paid, I'll make it right." "Honey, you can't keep doing this," Rosie replied, her gruff voice softer than usual. "You can't pay customers tabs out of your tips. It's just until the guy comes back. He seemed nice enough, just forgot his wallet." It happens. Bull realized what had occurred. Someone had skipped out on their bill, and Sarah was offering to cover it from her own pocket. In his world, in the brotherhood he knew, that kind of loyalty to strangers was rare and precious. But here was this woman, this struggling single mother, willing to pay for someone else's meal because she believed in people's basic goodness. He made a decision. Bull walked to the register, where Sarah was still negotiating with Rosie about the unpaid tab. He placed his own check and a $100 bill on the counter, then looked directly at Sarah. "That unpaid tab," he said quietly. "Add it to mine." Sarah's eyes widened. "Oh no, sir. You don't have to." "Bull," he corrected gently. "And yes, I do. Sometimes we help each other out. That's what people do. But it's not your responsibility." Bull's expression grew serious, but not unkind. "Sarah, I've been riding these highways for 20 years. I've been helped by strangers more times than I can count. Sometimes it was a meal when I was broke. Sometimes it was a phone call when my bike broke down. Sometimes it was just a kind word when the world felt too heavy. This is my turn to pass it along." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's very kind." Bull nodded, pocketed his change, and walked toward the door. As his hand touched the handle, he turned back. "Sarah? People like you. People who take care of others even when they're struggling themselves. The world needs more people like you. Don't ever forget that." And then he was gone, the chrome bell chiming his departure, leaving Sarah standing at the register with tears streaming down her face and Rosie shaking her head in amazement. What Sarah didn't know was that Bull Morrison wasn't just any biker, and the Desert Wolves weren't just any motorcycle club. Bull was a man whose word carried weight across 3 states, whose character was vouched for by everyone from small-town sheriffs to big-city mayors. When Bull Morrison said someone was worth knowing, people listened. That evening, Bull made a phone call to his road captain, a man named Jake Hammer Thompson, who had ridden with Bull for 8 years and trusted his judgment completely. Bull told him about the diner, about Sarah, about the kind of kindness that was becoming rare in a world that seemed to grow harder every year. She covered a stranger's tab. Hammer, $87 out of her own pocket, and I could see in her eyes that $87 meant groceries for her kids. Hammer was quiet for a moment. In the background, Bull could hear the sounds of the clubhouse pool balls clicking, someone tuning a guitar, the low murmur of brothers sharing stories from the road. What are you thinking, Bull? I'm thinking about Maria. Hammer knew immediately what Bull meant. Maria had been Hammer's sister, a single mother who had worked 3 jobs to support her daughter after her husband left. She had died in a car accident 5 years ago, exhausted from too many hours and too little sleep driving home from her third job at 2 in the morning. At her funeral, Hammer had made a promise to himself that he would never again let a woman struggle alone when he had the power to help. "Tell me what you need," Hammer said simply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Get on the wire. Call the other chapters. Tell them about Sarah Chen at Rosie's Diner on Highway 9. Tell them what I told you. And tell them we ride at dawn. The Wire was the informal communication network that connected motorcycle clubs across the country. It wasn't about territory or colors or club politics. It was about the things that mattered. Lost kids who needed to be found. Veterans who needed help navigating bureaucracy. Families who needed support after tragedies. And sometimes it was about waitresses who covered strangers' tabs because they believed in kindness. Hammer started with the local chapters. The Iron Eagles from Cedar Falls, who had a reputation for organizing charity rides for children's hospitals. The Road Angels from Springfield, who specialized in helping military families. The Thunder Riders from Kansas City, who had once raised $50,000 for a family whose house burned down. Each call led to more calls. By midnight, the word had spread to clubs in Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. By 2 a.m., bikers in Arkansas and Texas were gassing up their rides. By 4 a.m., the largest gathering of motorcycle clubs in the region's history was beginning to form, all because of an $87 tab and a waitress who believed in helping strangers. But this wasn't just about the money. Bull had been clear about that. This was about showing Sarah that kindness didn't go unnoticed, that her goodness mattered, and that sometimes the universe finds ways to balance the scales. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cool, with the kind of October weather that made people think about winter and warm coffee. Sarah was at work by 5 a.m., as always, going through her familiar routine of brewing coffee and setting up for the day. Emma had a field trip that day, and Sarah had scraped together the $12 for the admission fee, plus $2 extra for a snack. Jake was still young enough for free preschool, but Sarah knew that in 2 years, she would need to figure out kindergarten and after-school care, problems that kept her awake at night, staring at ceiling and running numbers that never quite added up. The morning regulars came in as always, Frank with his black coffee and wheat toast, Martha with her oatmeal and orange juice, Deputy Rodriguez with his usual order and his usual generous tip. Sarah moved through her routine with practiced grace, smiling and chatting and making sure everyone felt welcome. Around 10 a.m., she heard something unusual, a low rumble in the distance, like thunder rolling across the prairie. But the sky was clear, and the weather report hadn't mentioned storms. The rumble grew louder, closer, until the windows of the diner began to vibrate softly. Frank looked up from his newspaper. "That's a lot of motorcycles." Martha peered through the window, her eyes widening. "Honey, I think they're stopping here." Sarah felt her heart skip. Through the large front windows, she could see them coming down Highway 9 like something out of a movie. Motorcycles stretched in a line that disappeared around the curve, chrome catching the morning sun, engines thundering in harmony. Harley-Davidsons, Indians, Triumphs, custom bikes built in garages by men who understood that motorcycles were more than transportation, they were freedom on 2 wheels. The first bike to pull into the parking lot was Bull's. Sarah recognized him immediately, even with his helmet on. Behind him came bike after bike after bike, filling the parking lot. Then the street, then the empty field beside the diner. Leather and chrome, and steel, patch colors from a dozen different clubs. Riders from teenagers to grandfathers, men and women, united by the road, and something deeper, a shared understanding of what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. As engines shut off one by one, the morning air filled with a different kind of sound. The creak of leather, the crunch of boots on gravel, the low murmur of voices belonging to people who had traveled hundreds of miles for a purpose. Bull walked through the door first, removing his helmet to reveal a smile that transformed his weathered face. Behind him came his brothers and sisters from the Desert Wolves, then members of other clubs, the Iron Eagles, the Road Angels, the Thunder Riders, the Chrome Crusaders, the Highway Saints. Patches and colors that normally stayed in their own territories, united today by something more important than club politics. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in her trembling hand, as the diner filled with more people than it had ever held. They kept coming until every booth was full, every chair was taken, and bikers were standing along the walls, their presence filling the space with a kind of quiet energy that was both overwhelming and oddly comforting. Finally, Bull approached the counter. The entire diner had gone silent, except for the soft clink of coffee cups and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Sarah's eyes were wide, confused, and more than a little frightened. "Sarah," Bull said gently, his voice carrying in the quiet space. "Do you remember what you did yesterday?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I just paid a tab. You paid a stranger's tab. $87 out of your own pocket. You didn't know if he would come back. You didn't know if you'd ever see that money again. But you did it anyway because you believed in kindness." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Around the diner, she could see faces watching her with expressions of respect and something that looked almost like reverence. Bull continued, his voice growing stronger. "Sarah, I want you to meet some friends of mine. These people have ridden from all over Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. They came because they heard about what you did, and they wanted to meet the woman who still believes in helping strangers." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was in her 50s, wearing a leather vest covered in patches, her gray hair pulled back in a neat braid. "Honey," she said, her voice warm with a slight southern accent. "My name is Linda Rodriguez. I'm with the Chrome Crusaders from Tulsa. I heard about what you did, and I wanted to tell you something. My daughter was a single mother, just like you. She worked 2 jobs and struggled every day to make ends meet. She died in a car accident 3 years ago, too tired from working too much. But she was like you, she always helped others, even when she couldn't afford to. You remind me of her, and that's a beautiful thing." An older man with a white beard stepped up next. "I'm Pastor Jim Collins from the Highway Saints in Kansas City. Sarah, what you did yesterday, that's what faith looks like in action. That's loving your neighbor as yourself, even when you don't know your neighbor's name." One by one, they introduced themselves. Veterans who had been helped by strangers when they came home from war. Single parents who understood the weight of raising children alone. People who had been down on their luck and been lifted up by unexpected kindness. But they weren't just there to talk. Bull reached into his vest and pulled out an envelope, thick and official-looking. "Sarah, yesterday, you covered an $87 tab for a stranger. Today, we want to cover something for you." Sarah's hand shook as she took the envelope. Inside were legal documents, official papers with seals and signatures. As she read, her knees grew weak, and she had to grip the counter to keep from falling. "The deed," she whispered, her voice breaking. This is the deed to the diner." Bull nodded, his own eyes misty. "Rosie Patterson has been wanting to retire for 5 years, but she couldn't find the right person to take over. Someone who understood that this place isn't just a business. It's a community center, a safe haven, a place where people come when they need to feel like they belong somewhere." Rosie stepped out from the kitchen, where she had been quietly watching the entire scene unfold. Her tough exterior had cracked, revealing the tender heart underneath. "Honey, I've been watching you for 3 years. I've seen how you treat people, how hard you work, how much you care about this place and everyone in it. This diner needs someone who understands that serving food is just part of the job. The real work is serving hope." Sarah was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that came from 3 years of suppressed fear and exhaustion, and the overwhelming relief of knowing that her children would be safe, that they would have a future, that the desperate calculations and sleepless nights could finally end. "But how?" she managed to ask through her tears. "How is this possible?" Hammer stepped forward. 643 bikers from 11 different clubs contributed. Some gave $5, some gave 500. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the principle. You showed kindness to a stranger, and we wanted to show kindness to you. Linda Rodriguez added. And it's not just the diner, honey. We took up a collection for improvements too. New equipment for the kitchen, fresh paint, updated furniture. This place is going to be exactly what it's always been, just better. Pastor Jim smiled through his own tears. Sarah, there's something else. We've set up a college fund for Emma and Jake. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to give them choices, to make sure that your sacrifice and their father's memory lead to something beautiful. Sarah looked around the diner at all these faces rough, weathered, marked by sun and wind and life's hard lessons, and saw nothing but love. Pure, unconditional love from strangers who had become family in the span of a morning. I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? Bull's voice was gentle but firm. Because kindness matters, Sarah. Because in a world that can be cold and hard and unfair, people like you remind us that goodness still exists. Because yesterday, when you paid that tab, you did it without expecting anything in return. You did it because it was right, and that kind of goodness deserves to be recognized. An older woman near the back called out, Honey, my grandson was in the service with Bull's nephew. That boy came home broken, couldn't find work, couldn't find his place. Your diner fed him for 3 months when he couldn't pay, just because Rosie said he looked hungry. Small kindnesses, Sarah. They ripple out in ways you never know. As Sarah stood there, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening, the front door chimed again. This time it was Emma and Jake, home early from school and preschool, their eyes wide as they took in the sea of leather and chrome that had transformed their second home. Mommy? Emma said tentatively, her 7-year-old mind trying to process what she was seeing. What's happening? Sarah knelt down, pulling her children close, her voice thick with emotion. Something wonderful, baby. Something absolutely wonderful. Jake, 4 years old and fearless, walked right up to Bull and looked up at the giant of a man. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? Bull knelt down to Jake's level, his tough exterior melting completely. I'm a good guy, little man. We're all good guys. And we came here because your mama is one of the best people we've ever met. Emma, always the smart one, looked around at all the faces watching them with love and respect. Did my mom do something special? Linda Rodriguez answered before Bull could speak. Sweetheart, your mama shows kindness to strangers every single day. She works harder than anyone I know to take care of you and your brother. And yesterday, she did something that reminded all of us why kindness matters. What did she do? Emma asked. She helped someone who needed help, even though it cost her money she didn't have. Bull explained simply. She did it because it was the right thing to do. And that kind of goodness is rare and precious. Jake tugged on Bull's vest. My mama is the best mama in the whole world. Bull's voice was husky with emotion. Yes, she is, buddy. Yes, she is. As the reality of their new life began to sink in, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Real, tangible hope for the future. Her children would be safe. They would have opportunities. The diner that had been their refuge would now be their home and their livelihood. But more than the financial security, more than the deed and the college funds and the promises of support, Sarah felt something even more precious. She felt seen. For 3 years, she had worked quietly, struggled quietly, sacrificed quietly, believing that nobody noticed or cared about the small acts of kindness that made up her days. She had been wrong. That afternoon, as word spread through the small town of Cedar Falls, people began arriving at the diner. Not just to satisfy curiosity about the hundreds of motorcycles parked outside, but to be part of something extraordinary. Local families came to meet the bikers who had traveled so far to honor one of their own. Children pressed their faces against the windows to see the gleaming motorcycles. Elderly residents shared stories about kindness they had witnessed or received. The mayor showed up, then the sheriff, then the local newspaper editor who had heard about the story and wanted to make sure it was told properly. But through it all, the focus remained on Sarah and the simple truth that had brought everyone together. Kindness matters. As evening approached and the bikers began preparing for their long rides home, each one made a point of saying goodbye to Sarah personally. They hugged her, shared their own stories of kindness given and received, and promised to stop by whenever their travels brought them through Cedar Falls. Bull was the last to leave. As he put on his helmet and prepared to mount his bike, Sarah approached him with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said simply. Bull looked at this remarkable woman who had changed his life as much as he had changed hers. "Sarah, you already did. You thanked me yesterday when you paid that tab. You thanked me every time you smiled at a stranger. Every time you went the extra mile for a customer. Every time you chose kindness when the world gave you reasons to be bitter. That's all the thanks I need. Will I see you again?" Bull smiled, his weathered face crinkling with genuine warmth. "Sarah, the Desert Wolves ride Highway 9 at least once a month. This diner is officially on our route now. You'll see more of us than you probably want to." As Bull rode away into the sunset, his brothers and sisters following behind him, the thunder of their engines gradually fading into the distance, Sarah stood in front of her diner with her children beside her, and a future full of possibilities ahead of them. 6 months later, Sarah's diner had become more than just a restaurant. It had become a symbol of what was possible when kindness was recognized and rewarded. The story had spread across the country, inspiring copycat acts of generosity and reminding people that ordinary heroes walk among us every day. Emma was thriving in school, her natural intelligence no longer shadowed by worry about her family's future. Jake had started talking about becoming a motorcycle mechanic when he grew up, inspired by the gentle giants who had changed their lives. And Sarah had found something she had thought was lost forever: joy in her work, peace in her heart, and hope for tomorrow. The bikers had kept their promise. Hardly a week went by without someone from one of the clubs stopping by for coffee and pie, bringing news from the road and stories from other diners, other towns, other acts of kindness that rippled out like stones thrown in still water. But perhaps the most beautiful part of the story was what happened to the customers who witnessed it. Inspired by what they had seen, they began looking for opportunities to help others. Tips got bigger. Patience grew longer. Kindness became more common, as if Sarah's example had given everyone permission to be their better selves. Because sometimes, the angels we need most don't have wings. Sometimes they wear aprons and serve coffee and believe in the basic goodness of strangers. Sometimes they cover $87 tabs because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe finds a way to say thank you. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in this world, if it inspired you to look for opportunities to help others, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary goodness of ordinary people. And in the comments below, tell us about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness, or when you had the chance to help a stranger. Because Sarah's story isn't unique. It's happening every day, in diners and gas stations and grocery stores across this country, wherever people choose compassion over indifference. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. And sometimes, the angels we pray for ride motorcycles. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.